All right, hello and welcome to a new week. This lecture, we're going to talk about computer science and how it's being used in other disciplines, because sharing is a nice thing to do. Okay, so yeah, let's get started, and I'm going to try and explain, kind of answering this question. Nobody in their job as a computer scientist is just making programs to move turtles around all day, though it may be very, very fun. So let's talk about like the real work that's getting done with computer science in a bunch of different fields, okay? It's not just everybody's working on Facebook or something. There are many, many different things you can do with computer science, and so let's start with social sciences and also art. So the first thing that I want to talk about, and I think I've talked about it a little bit before, is called computational linguistics. And really that's just a fancy long word for when you take a computer and you apply like programs and programming to human languages. Like you give it text and you have it do things with text, for example. So it's not just text, though, that makes up this field called computational linguistics. There's also, of course, anything that has to do with language. So speech is a way that you can produce language, right? And so you have things like speech recognition. You can probably like use Siri on your phone, for example, or Alexa, things like that. That is under the umbrella of computational linguistics. And it's not just recognizing what your speech is doing, what you're talking about. It's also like, let's make computers talk, and that was a very important thing to get going back in the day, and that is under the term of speech synthesis. Okay, that's when computers can talk to us. Okay, I'm sure you all know the voice that they have, like that's default in those TikTok videos, right? That is speech synthesis, okay? And then finally, probably the most exciting subfield of computational linguistics, which I guess some of these are sub-elements of, is called natural language processing, and I abbreviate it as NLP for short because of those first letters there. And here's a nice little quote from an article about NLP. The ultimate objective of natural language processing, is to read, decipher, understand, and make sense of the human languages in a manner that is valuable. Okay, so something that may or may not be valuable to you is like when you go on a website and it pops up a little box that says, "Hey, let me help you with something. What are you looking for? Can I help you?" And it looks like there is no X, and sometimes we wish there was an X. But what this is doing is it's taking your text that you write. It's not a human on the other side. This is a virtual person. And it's deciphering, trying to understand, after reading your text, what you're asking for. And maybe it can show you a little help page or connect you to a human if it determines that a human is necessary in this situation. Okay? So computational linguistics is all the rage these days, and you have seen it, I am sure. Okay, so that's a fun little example, and let's just dig into like what it's doing with a short little example. So what is Siri doing? Like, what is your iPhone doing when you say, "Hey Siri, set a timer for 5 minutes"? Okay, so remember, these are in quotes, so this is your voice talking right now. The first thing that NLP has to do is translate this voice into text, okay? It needs to notice that, okay, you said these words in this order. "Hey Siri, set a timer for 5 minutes. So it needs to translate sound, remember up here it's sound, down to text, okay? So once it's got that, it can do its stuff. All right, so the first thing it's looking for are these two words, right? Once it has text, it can just say, search and be like, okay, does the first bit of this text say, "Hey Siri"? If so, I need to wake up now. Okay, so this is like activation of Siri. So it needs to notice that these two words that call it to action have been said. And then it needs to somehow parse this sentence over here, and it does the like grade school grammatical stuff, or like, okay, find me the verb, find me the object. And then we have like a little clause here with a preposition. It's like duration, But it needs to pick apart your sentence like this. It's got to find the verb, what it's talking about, what do you want to do, set, okay, what are we setting, a timer, okay, we need some more information, what are we doing with the timer, how long are we setting it for, oh, for 5 minutes, okay, and so all of this together is what Siri is doing. Some of it is like, I guess all of it's on your phone these days, right? It's processing your voice entirely on your phone, which is really crazy to think about. Some other services, like perhaps Alexa, they may or may not be sending it still through the internet, and you have a large, powerful server trying to figure out what you're talking about. Okay, but it doesn't matter. This is what's happening. Okay, it's trying to parse your voice after translating it to text. It's got to figure out what you're saying, of course. So that is natural language processing. And let's move on now to a fun little topic called human-computer interaction. So what human-computer interaction is, it's another kind of umbrella term, and what you do in this field is you study the interfaces between humans and computers. And as you can imagine, this got a bit more complex over the years, where like at the beginning it was just a bunch of text on a screen, and now suddenly we have icons and folders and windows to move around and drag, and then suddenly we have things like Pokemon Go, where you have this virtual reality thing going on. Okay, so that is a big jump from text to like windows to using cameras and plotting stuff on the screen. It's crazy. All right, so yeah, I'm sure you've seen plenty of YouTube videos that show that human-computer interaction isn't just about humans, because there are like iPad games for cats, or at least games that can also be played by a cat, which is fun to think about. And yeah, so you have human-computer interaction researchers, people working back in the day, to thank for the way that your computer looks right now, like the way that all the windows are arranged. I guess you can blame Microsoft if you really don't like some feature, but I think we can all agree that it's a whole lot better to see images and like structured text, like small text over here, bigger text up here. That's a lot better than just a bunch of words of the same size on a screen, okay? Which was what computers were at the very beginning, yeah? So that is amazing, and human-computer interaction is what gave us that, okay? Graphical user interfaces, moving windows, it's all beautiful, okay? Also, little peripherals, which is a fun word for me to say, I guess, those were also invented and needed to be invented. It wasn't obvious that, hey, we need mice. Like, that was a very key invention back in, I think, the late 70s by Xerox, if you can imagine. It was a copier company that invented the mouse. They shared all of their cool secrets with Apple, and they were the first ones who used all these graphical user interfaces with Windows and mice. Okay, so that's fun. And then recent stuff is augmented reality or virtual reality, things like that. Okay, so I guess this should technically really be AR. And that's Pokemon Go. And I think you can imagine how much computational effort needs to go into Pokemon Go. It's kind of insane. Like, it needs to first take your camera's information, which you have to get, and then it needs to discover where in like the world you are, right? So it's maybe using like the sensor to know that your phone is currently facing up, and then it tries to like figure out what's on the screen so that it can draw Pikachu at like a correct spot. So it's got to somehow like make a little grid here of like where we are, and so it's got to find like the horizon, like where you are, all these little grids, and like be like, okay, that's that much far back, that's 5, okay, now we're getting closer, It's got to figure that stuff out, and that is the job of augmented reality. Then it places a Pikachu there, and you can catch it, and if you move, at least in some augmented reality games, like Pikachu stays right here on this patch of grass. If you move the camera slightly that way, he's going to stay there. You got to like turn it back. I can't remember if Pokemon Go just draws Pikachu wherever you are or not, but that is a cool thing that a lot of apps do. Okay, so that is human-computer interaction, a very fun topic. And then we have more arty kinds of things, like music. We all listen to music, right? And it looks like I accidentally capped some of my circles from last time. Sorry about that. I couldn't see them. And so computers are very good at making music, right? If you like electronic music, you kind of need a computer to make that happen, right? So the very first digital synthesizer, for example, was made by Yamaha back in 1974, which is quite exciting. Way, way back in the day, with very simple processors, they were able to make music that you wanted to listen to, right? And a lot of people like these old ones, which is fun. Then you have your more fancy apps that a lot of producers use, like Logic Pro, Ableton Live, things like that. And that allows you to make your music and put all of the tracks in a certain spot. And yeah, that's music production for you. You can place all your tracks, you can make your own little beats that you can click on. It's all wonderful. Like even apps like GarageBand on Macs are quite powerful these days, right? So computers are really good at making music, surprisingly. And they're also really good at simulating hardware, which can sometimes be very, very expensive, right? So software, you can use programs on your computer to make your guitar sound like, here's my best drawing of a guitar. It's an electric guitar, of course. There are the pickups. You can make it sound like, you just plug it into your computer, you can make it sound like a ridiculously expensive tube amp, and it's amazing, right? That is what software can do these days. It's wonderful. And just to talk about stuff that we've learned about in the past, they even use machine learning in those kinds of apps to make the amp sound right. They learn how to sound like this real physical thing, which is crazy. Okay, so that's music production. Yeah, so I'm just throwing a bunch of little examples at you, really. Yeah, that's where we're going. Okay, a small step for music is, well, what you look at, digital things, digital art. So what is this space? What's going on here? Okay, so, yeah, Photoshop is the big thing, right? Everybody loves Photoshop, and it is being used to make a bunch of digital art these days, right? So maybe, like the quote goes, like, the best composers of our time are writing music for movies because that's where the money is, right? And probably the best artists of our time are painting digitally, perhaps, in Photoshop, because that makes it really, really easy to get into art, right? You don't have to buy a bunch of materials. It's all there with your tablet and your computer, okay? So there's plenty of talented artists working entirely digitally these days, and that will be, of course, the topic of your next essay, the one that you're working on. And yeah, we have to figure out, like, is this okay? Is this digital art thing, is that as impressive? Okay, so yeah, and I think, again, most people are using digital things. They're making digital art rather than physical art because you reach more people that way, right? And that's how you make the most amount of money. And then also, of course, computers are really good at doing things in 3D. So 3D artwork becomes a thing, and you have programs like Maya or Blender. I can't remember which one this is, but you can essentially sculpt on a computer. It's crazy to think about. You like use the pressure of your pen to like carve out this tiger, for example, and you can apply like the fur and make it all realistic. It's amazing. So it's not just 2D art, like all this stuff. You can also have 3D art down here. Okay, so that is digital art in a nutshell, and it's very, very exciting to think about, right? Computers are helping us do all of these things, and we kind of take them for granted, right? And I guess that's the point. Like, they're just a tool to help us do what we want to do at the end of the day, right? So that is digital art. And now I would like to switch gears a little bit to talk about medicine and science. Okay, so let's talk about that just briefly. Okay, sorry that this slide is so tiny. There's just a lot of fun information on it. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about with weather forecasting is that you can model the atmosphere using fluid dynamics and thermodynamics equations. So this is very, very weird to think about, but computers are really good at simulating things, right? So what they do is they pretend that, like, our atmosphere is just a box. It's full of air, right? That's our fluid. And it has a bunch of, like, things moving around in it. It's got temperature, it's got speed, it's got humidity, it's got things like that. So everything's moving around here. And the whole goal of weather forecasting is to take all this data, like all these readings of, like, the speed, the temperature up here, down here, over here, the humidity, like, I don't know, 77% over here, 12% over here. Take all of that at time A and then predict at time B what that same little box of air is going to look like. Yeah? Maybe the wind's going strong up in that direction. Who knows? All like that. And different humidities, like 12% over there now. Okay? So that is the whole goal of weather forecasting, and if you could model the atmosphere well enough, using all this fluid dynamics and thermodynamics stuff, then you can more or less accurately model this with enough sensors, right? You need a bunch of sensors to, like, okay, at this particular spot on this cross street in Fresno, what is the temperature? What is the humidity? What is the wind speed, right? With enough of those sensors and enough computers as well, with radar data and things like that also, you can make some really accurate predictions, okay? And this is supposed to be time B, right? That's the whole goal of weather forecasting. It's a really fun little field, right? And so like all simulations, though, all these equations are kind of not perfect, right? They don't really model every little thing because we can't put an infinite amount of sensors at every spot in Fresno, right? It's not going to work like that. So your predictions are more or less accurate for a while, and then that's where, like, randomness starts taking over, right? So the farther into the future you try to predict, the more, like, errors you have. They start compounding, like there's randomness involved, right? Everything gets worse, your predictions aren't as good, and so then you end up blaming the weather person, right? So don't yell at them, it's just the computer's fault. Buy them better computers, buy them better sensors, more sensors, right? More radar, things like that. So that is weather forecasting, and if you can believe it, our computers have been getting faster over the years. Just imagine how bad weather forecasting used to be. It's so much better now, okay? So we should all be very thankful for what computers have done for us, at least, up until this point, okay? So it's not that bad. And then, yeah, some things that are near and dear to our hearts are air quality forecasting and wildfire simulations as well, okay? So air quality, for example, it's a very, very similar kind of thing. So you make your model of the atmosphere, you figure out where the bad things, the pollen, the dust, the pollution, where that's all coming from, the speeds of the wind, things like that. Then you make your little model. You make another box, okay? Pretend this is the box that contains Fresno and see what happens, okay? Run your little simulations, and then we can predict, like, okay, the air is going to be a bit better tomorrow because of the wind coming in from the bay, right? That is the way this all works. So it's just a bunch of sensors, it's just a bunch of simulations. And so again, you're making a model, and we've had some unprecedented things recently, right? So those huge, giant wildfires last summer, those really threw off the air quality forecast if you were watching it. I know I was, because I wanted to know when I can go outside and go running, right? So the model only works as well as it's been predicted to work, right? Because computers, they make predictions based on what they've seen before, right? And so they learn, like, okay, if the wind's doing this, it's going to do this later, right? But these wildfires, they kind of ruined everything, right? They were unprecedented. They were so huge that the models had never seen anything like them, right? And so they were kind of guessing at that point. They were trying to predict based on what they knew, and their predictions weren't as accurate. So that is a fun thing to think about, right? So that's air quality. And then same with wildfires, right? Wildfire simulations are pretty good at predicting fire behavior. And what it does is it tells you, okay, if the fire is going up here, like here is the perimeter of the fire, and this is the way the wind is blowing over here, like the wind's blowing in that direction. And so you take all these readings, and you have like a heat map from a satellite, for example, like the fire is right here. They can predict where it's going to go. And so maybe if the wind's blowing this way, they can predict like tomorrow, the fire is going to have expanded mostly over here, not so much over here. So like you should make all your efforts over here, for example. That's what it's trying to say. Okay, those are wildfire simulations. And again, very cool examples of how computers are doing some very exciting things and making our lives quite a bit better, right? So that is weather forecasting in a nutshell. I quite enjoyed these little topics here. So let's go to another. Genome sequencing. Again, a relatively recent thing to want to do, to sequence a genome, right? So computers had a strong part to play in this process. Okay, so a very celebrated thing back in the day was to obtain the first mostly complete sequence of human DNA. I am not good enough at biology to tell you why it was only mostly complete and why it was still okay, but I'm sure there's parts of our DNA that are just kind of useless, and probably that was what was going on there. So we essentially completed this sequencing of one human's DNA back in 2007, okay? And this was a wonderful success that people talked about and were very excited about. Okay, so we found a way to take somebody's DNA. This is my best drawing of DNA. And to go from that to the sequences of the A's, the C's, the T's, and the G's, right? Just all of them like that. That's what we did, and that was celebrated. Okay, so this was done back in 2007, and it's a nice combination of engineering because we had to like make machines to do all this stuff to automatically like, okay, put the little let's look at this base pair right here. Okay, let's move the DNA a little bit to the left and then look at this base pair. Okay, so that needed a lot of engineering effort, but also a lot of computer science software. Okay, so that is genome sequencing in a nutshell, and it was a wonderful thing. Okay, and then actually in the same year, 2007, there was a company that started called 23andMe. Maybe you've heard of them. And what they did was they started testing you for your ancestry, like trying to figure out, okay, what is my ancestry genetically, what's going on there, and so they would tell you like, okay, yes, you were, like here's the map. Here was like, if you are of European descent, for example, it would say that, okay, yeah, so there are people with your genome over here, down here, here's Italy. If you're of African descent, like, okay, here's people that we tested over here, kind of match your DNA, things like that, okay? And then same for Asian descent over here, like people that we matched with have similar DNA in this location, and so it can kind of figure out your ancestry based on that. And then with ancestry, I'm sure you've heard, there are also different kinds of risks for certain diseases. Some groups of people are more at risk for certain diseases than others. Okay, so that was also something that they wanted to figure out, and they provided that service for you. So what 23andMe does, it was started in the same year. I think you can imagine how expensive it was to sequence human DNA, like the entire thing. 23andMe is a bit cheaper, right? It's marketed to normal people like us. So they don't actually sequence your whole genome. That's not what they're doing. Rather, there is a way for them to figure out if certain pieces of your DNA match up. Okay, so maybe, well, it's still taking all of your DNA. Like, here's your long strand of DNA that it's getting from you somehow, like a swab or something. And so what it does is they have special machines that kind of like chop this up a little bit and match it with other pieces of DNA, which are like marked in a certain way. And they have a way to figure out, like, okay, does this little piece match right here? Maybe it matches over here, over here. It checks everywhere to see if these little pieces of DNA ever match up. And those pieces strongly correlate with ancestry, where you come from, like where your ancestors come from, and then also like high risk of certain diseases, okay, because that also correlates. So that's what they're doing. They're not sequencing your genome. They're essentially taking pre-cut pieces of DNA and trying to match them, which is apparently an easier problem to solve, and it's a bit cheaper. Yeah. So that is genome sequencing and also just testing of your DNA. So I've never tried this. It sounds cool. I would be excited to know if any of you have and what results you got back, if any of them were surprising. Right? So let's move on now to a bit of a different topic, still under the medicine and science umbrella, but this is a bit more technical, a bit more like mechanical. So let's talk about robotic appendages. So I took this fun picture from this article. I don't want to plagiarize too badly on these slides. So let's talk about robotic appendages, right? So this is what happens when you want to move your arm, okay? Let's pretend you have an arm right now. You are in an undamaged body. What happens is your brain first has to think, yes, I would like to move my arm, please. Hey, arm, let's move us, okay? And then the brain's going to send a signal down to your arm, okay? That's what happens. And then your arm starts moving based on what you were thinking, okay? So here are the different kinds of robotic appendages that you can have now. So let's pretend that you didn't have your right arm, for example, and you can be fitted with either a prosthetic arm or a robotic arm, and this is a difference in terminology that I was not aware of until I researched this. So a prosthetic arm is it's down here. It's hooking into your nerves, okay? It's hooking into the nerves in the arm, so the brain's still, okay, I want to move the arm, okay, let's send a signal to the arm, and then that is hooked up, the prosthetic arm is hooked up to those nerves down here, and that is used to control that prosthetic arm, okay? So that is what a prosthetic arm is, and that is different to a robotic arm, okay? What that is doing is it's taking the nerve impulses a bit sooner, okay? This is what you get if you potentially have like a damaged spinal cord where your brain isn't able to send the signal all the way to your arm, okay? That's the idea, and so that's where you would need a robotic arm instead, all right? And so what a robotic arm does is it hooks up to usually the head, I think, and so you're getting the signals way up here somewhere with a little patch on you. It's looking for those signals in a special way, and so it can catch the signal way up here and send that through a wire to the robotic arm. Okay, that's the difference between a prosthetic arm and a robotic arm. It's where it's getting the signals. With a prosthesis, it's way down here. It's next to the arm because the spinal cord is okay still, but if the spinal cord is damaged, we get the signal straight from the brain. Okay, which is crazy to be talking about this kind of stuff. We're like intercepting our thoughts. Yeah. So yeah, that is the idea. Sometimes though, back in the day, they had to put these little pieces of, I'm not sure what, but some kind of metal maybe that like figures out the different signals. They had to do some kind of invasive surgery, okay? There were invasive robotic arms. You had to like dig into your skull and put some wires up in there, okay? And that would control a robotic arm, okay? In 2019, we made non-invasive robotic arms, okay? So you didn't have to dig into somebody's skull and put the sensors very close to their brain or on their brain. You could just put sensors on their head and read into that activity there, okay? So you don't have to perform any surgery. It's just all sitting on top, which is awesome, right? And so this, eventually they made this robotic arm do this, sit with the sensors on the head but not in the brain, and control this robotic arm in a very smooth way, okay? That is the idea. That's where I'm going with all this. It was a long explanation, I know, but that is the main difference. We are now here at this point. If you have a damaged spinal cord and you need a robotic arm, you don't have to get invasive surgery anymore, and the movement is quite good and smooth, apparently. Okay? It'd be fun to show a video. I couldn't find one. I should dig for next semester. That is robotic appendages in a nutshell. So this is another combination of using engineering to make the hardware and computer science to make the software, and have them all talk to each other for both prosthetic arms and robotic arms. Okay, these are hard words for me to say. So that is the idea of robotic appendages. Okay, let's continue. Let's talk about smart farms now. So this is again close to our heart as Fresnans. So farmers, they would like to monitor the way that their farm is running, right? I think we would all agree that that is a good idea. And so what you can do as a farmer is to put sensors around your fields to monitor stuff. So you're sitting in your house, there's your house, and you can stay there and wirelessly, potentially, here's like your plot with, I don't know, your plants. These are your plants. And you have sensors in the ground or a little bit outside, and they're all beaming back to you. You have a receiver. They're all beaming back to you like information, and you're picking those up on your little satellite dish or whatever. Okay? That is the goal of a smart farm, right? And so all these sensors, they're figuring cool stuff out. They're trying to see, okay, what does the soil look like? Is it watered enough? What is the hydration level of the soil, for example? What's the temperature outside? Ooh, it might be getting close to freezing. I should do something about that, okay? Maybe I should water things so that it freezes and doesn't harm the crops, right? So that is the beauty of smart farms. You can be sitting in your house as a farmer, and you can be getting all this information delivered to you from all these sensors. And so the cool technical term is like you create a mesh network of these sensors, and they're all talking to you and also to each other, right? They're all connected wirelessly, for example, and all this information is being communicated to you. It may control the sprinklers, things like that. That is a really cool feature of a smart farm, all right? This kind of mesh network. And then also, if the farmer is outside of the house, maybe they are trying to plow things, right? So GPS can actually automatically control your tractors, believe it or not. And so we have self-driving tractors way before we had self-driving cars, because it's a lot easier of a problem to solve. Okay, let me talk about self-driving tractors and draw a horrible looking tractor on this field. So here is a wheel, another wheel, a box with a box, and it's got stuff. Okay, that's my tractor. And it has a little GPS receiver inside, again talking to the cloud, the internet, the mesh network, and it's a lot easier to program it than a self-driving car, because, for example, there's nobody to hit. It just needs to know where it is in the field. Like, it needs to know the edges of the field, which you can program, and it doesn't have to obey any traffic rules, right? You can just move as it pleases. So yeah, the GPS information is going to keep you from going outside of your plot, and you can till your soil or plant your plants or harvest automatically. And again, I guess you could be back in your house at that point. So the farmers, they have it a bit easier these days than they used to, if you have enough money to buy all these fancy smart farm technologies. Okay. Similarly to all this stuff, we've been talking about sensors to like figure out what to do. That's all about making predictions, right? So you want to plan ahead for the growing season or next week, for example. So because you have all these sensors, you can play the kind of game that the weather forecasters are playing. In that you can be like, oh, the soil is getting dry. Let me turn on the sprinklers at this exact time when I know that the soil is going to be at the minimum allowable wetness level. Okay, things like that is possible because of this kind of big data technology. You can essentially machine learn stuff for your farm, personalized programs for all of your stuff, for all of your farm stuff, which is crazy. It's awesome. Okay, so 2 more slides, then we're out of here. Let's talk about outer space. All right, so everything that we've done, we've gone to the moon, right? Everything that we've done in space is because of computers. We were not able to do any of that before. I guess we maybe could have tried, but it probably wouldn't have ended very well, right? If anything, we have to like send data, receive data, right? So outer space is where computers shine, all right? So for example, we have telescopes. So here's us, Canada, us, California, Mexico. So here we are, Florida. That's my best North America. And we are using a ton of telescopes to look at the sky, right? Here's one here, for example. Maybe this is the Rocky Mountains, and we have a clear view of the sky. Let's look at things. Telescopes can be programmed to track a certain star, right? It can be programmed to always be pointing right there. And you need a lot of fine-grained control to do that because the Earth is moving, the stars are moving. You got to make sure it moves this telescope is moving ever so slightly along with this star, okay, and tracking it. That's nice. Then you also have, of course, satellites. Some of them even have telescopes on those. So here's my best drawing of a satellite. And so again, it is just a box that is being controlled by, I don't know, Houston or something. It's sending information, receiving information. It's doing a lot of cool things to talk to people, right? And so all this data, like, is telling the satellite what to do. Like, okay, turn on your thrusters because you're about to get ejected from orbit. Turn your telescope to look at the star. Things like that. This is all data being passed wirelessly, and computers are talking to other computers. Yeah, that's the whole idea. And then, of course, the Mars rover, all the rovers and things like that. Again, heavy amounts of information being sent from this and received by it to control it, to tell it what to do, and then let's take these readings, let's send them back to Earth. All this cool stuff being done in outer space. Isn't it amazing? Yeah? So that is outer space in a nutshell. Then my last example is another recent thing. It's called AlphaFold. It's protein folding via machine learning. And let me be specific, because there are multiple versions of this thing called AlphaFold. I want to talk about AlphaFold 2, which was released in 2020. Okay? It was really, really cool what it did. It blasted people out of the water. So, essentially, what AlphaFold was, or is, it's a machine learning tool that predicts the structure of proteins, okay? And you might ask, what in the world does that mean? So proteins in your body, in the coronavirus, they fold themselves. Just the way that they are made, the different amino acids that make up a protein, makes it fold in a certain way. It's like essentially magnets pulling on each other, right? It's making weird three-dimensional shapes that allow a protein to perform its specific action that it does, okay? So the shape of a protein, it it determines completely how like it interacts with other proteins, because if it doesn't fit, it's not going to work with another thing, right? So I guess the idea is proteins are not long straight lines of amino acids. They kind of coil up and they look more like this down here, okay? And they fit with other proteins miraculously to do cool stuff, all right? So AlphaFold, I guess I should put this down here. AlphaFold solved this problem so much better. The accuracy was amazing. AlphaFold, I don't know why it's unhappy. Maybe if I give it a capital F. So there was like a competition of protein folding via machine learning techniques, and AlphaFold 2 last year, they killed it, right? I don't remember how good their accuracy was, but if it wasn't in the 90s, it was in the 80s, and everybody else was down in the 60s, for example. It was so much better than what was there that they even thought they were cheating, okay? The competition people tried it with a brand new protein that has never been like seen before, figured out before, just to make sure. They tried it to make sure that they weren't cheating, and it also predicted it well. So it just learned magically via machine learning how proteins will structure themselves. It figures all this stuff out. So that's crazy. You might also be asking, why is this at all important? The idea is, the better you can predict the way a protein folds, the shape of it, the better you can understand how the cells work with these proteins, right? Because at the end of the day, they are all, everything's a bunch of proteins all the way down, right? That's the whole point. So the better we can predict these shapes, the better we can understand how cells work, how the viruses work, how our body works, and that will allow us to make medicines that are more efficient, okay? And we can make them even faster. And essentially, that's what we're doing with like the coronavirus vaccines. You can kind of imagine that they're trying to figure out, okay, how's this vaccine that we're making? It's just a bunch of amino acids, right? How's it going to interact when we with our body, with our immune system? Is it gonna be good? And that's that allows us to make some very, very accurate vaccines, for example. Okay, so that's AlphaFold 2, machine learning for protein folding. And so yeah, today was just a bunch of little examples about how computer science is being used in other disciplines to do cool stuff. So that's where I want to stop for today. Next time we'll pick it up with cryptocurrency, because that's a hot little topic, and I wanted to give us time for that, so we'll do that next time. All right, so I will see you now in the programming lecture.